This week on the Deep Leadership Podcast.
I think one of the things that we learned post-COVID is it confirmed our need, and I don't mean want, I mean our need for relationship and connection.
This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Wendi Swanson. Wendi is an internationally recognized strategic leadership consultant, facilitator, and program developer. For the last 2 decades, Wendi has worked with executive leaders to develop high-potential teams and organizational growth strategies. Through authenticity and intentionality, she encourages a human-centered approach to growth and redefines what it means to be a leader. Wendi gets to the root of what's holding a team back by working directly with management and frontline workers to create a model for change and growth at all levels of the organization. Wendi has delivered workshops across the globe for companies like Godiva, Best Buy, Yankee Candle, Ashley Furniture, Lazy Boy, and more. And I'm excited to have her on the show to learn from her expertise. So, Wendi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
It's so good to have you on the show. So good to have another leadership expert on here to learn from your perspective. And that's kind of where I want to start off. First of all, just give us your definition of leadership. What is leadership?
Okay. I love that question, John. Thank you for asking that. Over the years, I've been in the leadership world for almost 30 years, which I can't even believe that started in 1994. And, from my experience, leadership is continuing to evolve. I graduated from college in 1991 with a business degree and also did a minor in marketing. And with my business degree, leadership wasn't even an option. I couldn't even sign up for a leadership course. And today, I think you actually are getting your doctorate in leadership. Like you can get your doctorate in leadership. And it wasn't even a course for my business degree. So I just think that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's come a
So,
long way. I really see that as well. I remember my MBA I think I graduated from my MBA in 94, and there was no mention of leadership in that. And actually, when I teach at some schools in their MBA program, they're still having very little leadership training, which is scary. So, but some universities get it, and they're really bringing the leadership to the forefront, which is really good to see.
yeah, well, it's a whole new conversation, which I love. And, I call it the vintage style of leadership, which was more, dictatorial and directive and title based and, do what I say because I'm your boss. And, leaders were the C-suite. They were the VPs. We didn't talk about personal leadership and community leadership. And so I love that leadership is evolving. And so therefore, my definition of leadership has continued to evolve. And as I've traveled around the world, I've done consulting in 3 different languages. And the most recent was in 2018. I got to travel to Moscow, Russia 14
Wow.
times
Oh,
in 2018 in 9 months. One week I was even there 2 times in a week because I did a consulting gig and then I had to fly back to Colorado to give an insurance speech. And then I went back to give a management and leadership speech in Russia, in Moscow. And I'll tell you, as we're talking about how I define leadership, I will get to that, I promise. It's interesting that number one, everybody defines it differently based on their experiences and based on their journey. And there's even cultures today. I was doing a leadership workshop in Moscow, and I will remember this forever. I had a booth of translators in the back, and everybody's listening through their headphones. And all of a sudden, this business owner stands up and he's clearly not very happy with the content. And I'm talking about leadership as inspiration and engagement and creating culture and leadership being choice and emotional intelligence. And all of a sudden he's just had it and he stands up and he says, and it's being translated back into my ear. And, he says, Wendi, I will not listen to this. Here's the thing. In my business, if somebody doesn't do what I tell them to do, I just simply don't pay them.
Mm.
And I repeated that back to the translators in the booth to make sure that I had heard it correctly so that I could respond. It's just interesting because even as I define personal leadership or leadership to me, our listeners may say, wow, that's a really different definition than what I'm used to. So how I define leadership, John, is inspiration that propels action.
Okay.
So, I think about those people that I am inspired to follow, and those people who I am inspired to follow, it propels me into doing something differently. Maybe it's just seeing my blind spots. Maybe it's, I'm working on something personally with, I'm pretty intense. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so I'm really being intentional about softening my approach and being more vulnerable, being more transparent. And I will tell you, I'm having experiences where people are coming closer to me because I'm choosing to work on those things. And so I just believe that it's inspiration that propels action.
It's interesting because your definition fits the definition I always teach when I'm teaching classes on leadership. I always say there's three things, and I say it's motivation, people, and a goal, right? So that's what
Mm,
leadership boils down to. And so you have inspiration, and I actually kind of like that a little bit better because really what I find is that people are more motivated by themselves. Intrinsic motivation is much more
mm,
powerful than extrinsic motivation. So and when I hear the word inspiration, it's like a leader will inspire the internal motivation, right? They'll help them find that within themselves to do
that's
what they're
right.
going to do. So inspiration sounds to me a little more accurate than motivation. But again, yours is inspiration, and what you don't say is people, but it's implied, right? Inspiration that it propels action. You're inspiring people to get things done,
That's right.
and that's what leadership is. You have a group of people and you have one person who's acting in a leadership capacity and they're trying to bring everybody together to accomplish a task. And in my lifetime it's always been to do hard things, right?
Mm,
Is to bring a group of people together to do something really difficult that can't be done by one person.
mm-hmm.
And inspiration is a big part of that. And I love the idea of inspiration even versus motivation, because I think it's a more accurate word that
Mm-hmm.
that defines what the leader does.
Yeah. Well, and John, I do a lot of work in retail. And, back in the day, mystery shopping was the big thing.
Mm.
We got to do mystery shopping to make sure that people are doing what we need them to do, because here's what we know: as soon as the store manager leaves, people respond differently, and the customer has a different experience. And so, it's interesting because when you make that shift from management, just simply overseeing processes and actions, and, from overseeing and management to leadership, when people are inspired, they do it whether the supervisor is watching or not, because they want to, they believe in it, they're inspired, they're motivated to do that. So it's just a completely different culture.
It really is, yeah. And I think in some cases we want, in my time in corporate, I realized there were some roles I was in, they did not want a leader. They actually wanted a manager. They wanted somebody
Yeah.
that was going to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And then I've been in times where they were looking for a leader, someone that where the rules weren't clearly defined, and they wanted somebody to build something from scratch. And I found myself that I was more attracted to the jobs where I could lead and I could do difficult things with a team, bring a team together, build a team, do difficult things. That's where I thrived. And when I got into jobs that were in management, even those were promotions. So those were moved up and I'd have multiple plants. I hated those jobs because it was a management, like, don't break it. It's working well, don't break it. That's not me, right? And so I don't like those roles. And so I learned it, but it took me 22 years in corporate to figure out what I liked to do and what I didn't like to do. And so I think there's a big difference between the two. And when I found myself in management roles, I just did not like it. It wasn't my personality. It didn't fit what I like to do with working with people.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a place for both. And I think when we're talking about leadership, I think leadership also includes vision. You're inspired by people who have a big dream, a big vision. I think of Walt Disney being here in Orlando, Florida. Walt Disney had a dream. He had a vision of creating the happiest place on earth and the cleanest place on earth and the safest for his family. And I think it's interesting that long past his death, that is still happening. I go to Magic Kingdom and I'm in the customer experience industry. And so I walk in and just tears every time because there's that person at the front that, is 18 years old and is smiling and waving and, greeting every single one of the guests. And it's incredible. To me, that's leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's remarkable about them is the founder's intent lives on, right? So a lot of cases, the founder, when they pass away or they sell the company or whatever, the founder's intent is lost. It seems to me with Disney, the founder's intent is still there, and that's kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To me, that's super inspirational. So
it
it's
really
amazing.
is. Well, let's talk about this idea of human centered or human centric leadership. Tell us what it is and why is it more important now more than ever?
Yeah. So, we're still talking about post COVID, and that probably will be a term that we use forever.
Yeah.
There's a whole new language. I was just having some fun today and looking up some different language that we still use post COVID, like social distancing and sheltering in place and isolation and psychological safety and WFH, work from home, and YOM, you're on mute, all the things. And, as much as I joke about that, I think one of the things that we learned post COVID is it confirmed our need. And I don't mean want, I mean our need for relationship and connection. And I still don't think that we are seeing the full extent of the impact that isolation had to students who were taking classes online. My son was part of a collegiate baseball team. And when they had to leave and close school and come home and they no longer had that team, I mean, the impacts, businesses closing, borders closing. I think, a human centered approach is truly being able to connect
Mm.
one on one with a human. It's that relationship. And I think now more than ever in leadership, that is one of the biggest differentiators between a leader who inspires and a leader who does not.
Mm. I
Right.
absolutely love that. That's such an important point. And one of the reasons I got into writing about leadership and talking about leadership 10 years ago was I started thinking I was way down the road in my career, and I realized that my businesses tended to perform better than my peers' businesses, and that happened throughout my entire career. And a lot of times my peers would say, well, what are you doing differently? What are you doing? And I could never put my finger on what it was. I could never figure out. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just running the business like, I don't know, like I think
Right.
it should be run. But then I realized that a lot of what I learned how to run a business, I learned on a submarine at sea as an officer on a submarine at sea. And one of the
Mm,
things that's unique about a submarine is that it's very tight spaces. And so we spend a lot of, I mean, hours and hours with the people that work for us and the people we worked for. We had deep, deep relationships with everyone around us. We were connected in ways like we depended on each other for our very lives, right? So we had to conduct the mission, get home safely, and we held each other to high standards because we had a very difficult job to do where we could all die at any point in time, right? So I learned that people and connecting with people and having this shared a shared mission, right, and a shared goals was essential to success, to mission success. And so I
mhm,
brought that into the corporate world, not knowing that that was different than the way most people ran companies. I
mhm,
wanted to know my people. I spent time on the manufacturing shop floor. I knew my employees. They knew me. I told personal stories to my employees about my life and my challenges. And I asked them about their lives and their challenges. We got to know each other. We built
mhm.
a high level of trust. And to me, that seemed like common sense. But I realize it's sort of uncommon. And so the idea of now what you say is post COVID, we want that human connection. We're missing that human connection, and I think we've been missing it for a long time. And I think that COVID sort of really made it even worse.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I had an experience last week, John. Every year I do a growth conference for a dear client of mine in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta. And a year ago, we did our first conference that we had done live since COVID. And,
Mm.
we've done it for 12 years. And so we had done it virtually for 2 or 3 years. And then a year ago, we did it live. And I just remember I just wanted to touch everybody's faces. I mean, it was just like they wanted to touch mine. And I mean, it was just this incredible thing. And last week, I was back giving the second live one, live growth conference since COVID. And on Sunday morning, I just felt this, I don't know what it was, burning in my belly. I don't really know how to describe it other than a prompting to share my story. And I had never done that. And some of these managers I worked with for 12 years.
Mm.
And there was not a dry eye in the place. Like the hotel that we were at, it had a little app, and our person that was handling logistics for us was like getting on the app and ordering Kleenex for every table, because I mean it was super emotional, and
Mm.
I didn't expect that. What I also didn't expect, though, is at the end of the day when I came off stage, there was a line of people who were waiting to share their story with me. And then we had a gala and awards dinner that night. Same thing that night. People being vulnerable and transparent and just wanting to share their story because I had shared my story. And so when I got on the plane Monday morning, it just hit me how desperate we are for that human connection. And somebody who takes the time, number one, to share their story and then listens to your story, I don't think it's happening. And so that was a learning for me, that I get to step out and be more vulnerable and more transparent, as Brene Brown talks about. It was powerful.
It really is. I think because it says that this environment is safe for these discussions to be said,
That's
because
right.
of this, so the leader has sort of given permission that says, you know what,
Mm.
I'm, I've had these challenges as well. I've gone through this as well. I understand, where you're coming from, because I've had the same problem, right? And I think, one of the things I think it really does help is that it builds a bond, but I think it's more it builds trust,
Mhm.
because you are a human.
Yeah.
You have flaws, you have failures, and you're not some plastic phony manager that says we need a 20% increase
Right.
in productivity because I said so, right? And
That's
that's
right.
generally what you would get from corporate, and but I think to say to the group is like, guys, we're really struggling this month, and we've got to pick it up. And I know you guys have worked hard, and a lot of you are tired. I said, but we've really got a lot more work to do to get to where we need to be in this company. And well, let's show management what we can do. That's
Yeah.
a whole different
Whole different conversation.
conversation than I need a 20% increase in
That's
productivity,
right.
right? It's
That's
the
right.
why behind it, and they trust you because you built that relationship over time.
That's right. And,
Yeah,
and I think sometimes, you're exactly right. I mean, it's a business. We still need the performance. So the story doesn't replace the performance.
right,
And
right.
when we have that environment where people do feel heard, they feel seen, they feel known, again, it comes back to that inspiration. I want to do a good job
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
trust my leader.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been attracted to since I've been studying leadership a little more in depth is the idea of transformational leadership. And I've always been a sort of a fan of servant leadership, but I kind of found transformational leadership, and I like the idea that I like that it fits better with the way I like to lead, only because I see myself helping people become their best in
Mhm.
pursuit of trying to help the company be its best.
That's
And
right.
I really think that that's my role as a leader, is like finding what really drives an employee, what gets them excited to get up every morning, what they really love to do. If I put them in a role that they feel like they've been put on earth to do, and they're excited to be there, and I've put them in the right role, and it's a role that's going to impact the company that we absolutely need,
Mhm.
then I think I don't have to do much work as a leader. When I have a group of people all in their right jobs doing exactly what
So
they love
true.
to do, it's like I just have to get out of the way, right? And just
That's right.
let the magic happen. And it takes a long time and it's hard to do, But when I've been in those situations where I had teams that were in their right positions and they love what they do, I really, the performance was not me at all. Like I literally was just giving people the tools they need and the help they needed, but I stood out of the way and let them make magic. And I think that is, and again, that's human centric. That's knowing what people are motivated and what lights them up every day, and what
Yeah.
what they hate doing, what they love doing. It's about getting to know people so that you can figure that out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that dovetails into the conversation of who can lead, you
Yeah.
know? And that's a conversation I had with my cousin, a few weeks ago. I was in Phoenix and she's like, can anybody lead or are you kind of born a leader? And when you really break it down, I think that leadership is the DNA of a leader is broken into two things. It's characteristics and skills.
Mm.
And characteristics, I think, are some of those things that we're born with. Some of it I think we can work on. I think the skills, there are so many skills that, as a leader, one of my favorite books, I don't know if you've ever read it, is Lead Like Jesus.
Hmm. No, I have
And
not.
it's,
No.
oh my goodness, it's so good because, you think about how, whether listeners are believers or not, or have a faith walk, it's interesting because you think about how Jesus led, and Jesus led by number one, asking questions. And he asked the obvious questions like, Elijah's in the cave and he's like, hey, dude, why in there? And obviously he knew why he was in there. He was in there because he was scared. He was running away.
Yeah.
So he asked questions that he already knew the answer to. When the disciples are walking down the road, and he knew the conversation. He's like, hey, what are y'all talking about? Well, he knew what they were talking about. And so, what questions we ask and how we ask questions in a way that creates self-discovery is powerful. And that's something that you can learn as a leader.
Hmm.
You think about the skill set of active listening. I have a same company that I was working with last week. Bill Robinson is the director. And I will tell you, I have never experienced a better active listener as a leader. And we were doing store visits a couple of years ago. And, I see this woman who starts running towards us. And I'm like, what is happening? And she's yelling, she's like, Bill. I'm like, what's happening? He had not worked with this manager for 14 years.
Hmm.
He remembered her name. He remembered her son's name. He remembered how old her son would be at this point. I mean, I sat back in awe. This guy, as a director, was overseeing I don't know how many people and remembers these details.
Yeah.
And so, those are all skills that when we are intentional, which I believe is one of the most important, when you talk about the DNA of a leader, you've got to have the skill set, number one, to care enough to be an active listener. And if you have to write it down, if you have to put it in a calendar, or whatever. So, there's so many skills that can be developed as a leader that create that inspiration that you're talking about, the want to.
Yeah, you just said something that's really powerful for listeners. Hopefully you pick that up, is that you may say to yourself, well, that's unusual. I have a terrible time with names, or
Right.
it's hard for me to remember stories or remember people. Look, I mean, that was me for the longest time. And what I do is I cheat. I have a spreadsheet. So I keep a spreadsheet of my key people and things that they tell me, and like I have their sons' names, their daughters' names, I have their birthdays, their sons and daughters' birthdays. I
Yep.
have it on a spreadsheet, and the reason I have it is so it helps me to remember things, and I have all their birthdays on my calendar, so I know when somebody's birthday is, and so I use systems to help me because it's not my natural tendency to just remember everything. So I'm an
Right.
engineer. I'm a very logical person. So I put all this stuff in spreadsheets so that it can help me, be that person that is connected to other people,
Mm-hmm.
even though it's not my natural tendency. So use a way to do it, but find a way to do it. I heard something from he's an executive coach, Marshall Goldsmith. He's very, very famous. And one of the things he said was this. He said, write down the most important people in your life, both in business and in your home, right? And he said on the Tuesday and Thursday of every week, think about all the people on that list, and is anyone on that list, has anyone on that list done something that is above and beyond, and you want to reach out to them and thank them
Mm,
for something they did. And it's just a way, it's a
mm,
systematic way to remember to thank people, and to acknowledge people, and acknowledge their efforts. And again, it's a system. So you think, well,
mm,
he's naturally a gifted leader. Some people are, but I think for
mm.
others, there's like me, I need methods to help,
Yeah.
remind me to do the right things in leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's choosing intentionality, it's choosing integrity, it's choosing to do the small things that quite frankly take such low effort and have such
Mm,
huge impact. I think
yeah.
for most leaders, it's not doing something extraordinary. It's just doing the little things that mean the most.
One of the things that you've got me thinking about, and just we can, as individual leaders, develop we can develop our DNA to be better, right, at leading. But one of the things that I was thinking is, what happens? I mean, how do leaders build a culture? Because one of the things that's interesting is that cultures don't build themselves, or they can build
Mhm,
themselves if left to their own devices, right? But
mhm,
I think that leaders have a really important job to create a culture within a company that is consistent with the values they want to see in the company. And I
mhm,
think it starts with the leader and how they act and how
mhm.
they treat others. But how do they flow that out to the organization within the culture? How do they do that in a purposeful way? I know it was something that's not on the list of things to talk about, but it's got you,
Yeah.
the way you talked about being, human centric and human centered. How do we
Mhm.
create that culture in our organization?
Yeah. So I think one of the things is sharing wins. And
Mm,
it sounds so simple, intentionally celebrating the team and intentionally, hey, this person achieved this, and hey, our team achieved this. And when multiple teams are doing that, we create a culture of performance and also celebration, which I think is huge. I think giving people the opportunity to have input, because when it's their idea, they're much more likely to want to do it. And, even if we're not going to do it, to have consistent brainstorming meetings about, hey, everybody, here's where we need to go. I want everybody's input. Let's put it all on the board. We know that we're not going to do all of these things. We know that one or two things are going to come out of this. So, I think the more intentional we can be about the collaboration and about getting people involved and about closing that communication gap. I think so often we say, hey, we want everybody's input, and then we choose to do something, and we never close that gap to say what we've decided and how we're going to measure it. And
yeah.
so, I think the more we can do that, and the more we can celebrate, and the more clear we can be in communication and getting people involved in that, and identifying clear communication lines, I think that's a number one thing that really creates that lack of motivation in teams is the lack of communication. And I think sometimes, the people with title, oftentimes the CEOs, are not the best communicators because they think that they communicated something and then everybody's just going to do it. And, I have this great exercise that I do with leadership executive teams, and I just take the C-suite and then the VPs and then the directors, and I put them all in this circle, and they all get to write their top 3 initiatives, and then we flip chart it and we put it up on the wall. And the first people that go are the directors and then the VPs, and then we end with the CEO, and he's looking at all these things. And my question is always, so how in alignment are we? And so often he looks at these and he goes, these are nowhere near what I thought your 3 strategic initiatives would be. And it's like, well, why is that? Are we meeting consistently? Are we, you know, are we closing the communication? Like, so there's this whole thing that you just start to see where the misalignment happens in the silos. And it's a tremendous exercise.
I think it's great. I think it's one of the biggest frustrations I had in my early corporate career, because I left the military where we had very clear mission, do
Mhm.
this really difficult thing and then get everybody home safely, right? And that was our mission, and everybody knew it,
Right.
and it was very clear. We were all on the same page. When I got to corporate, I struggled to find the mission. Like it
Right.
was, one day it was like we got to improve quality, we got to get our scrap costs down, we've got to improve productivity, and then it's like, oh, on time delivery, we got to work on that.
Mhm.
And it always seemed like we were working on different things, and everybody was working it on, trying to optimize their individual function,
Mhm.
and no, it just didn't seem like we didn't have the top 2 or 3 things that we as an organization were working to achieve. It seemed like we were doing trying, when you try to get clarification, it was like, yeah, everything's important. And when everything's
Right.
important, nothing's important. And I
That's
think
exactly right.
that was my biggest frustration is like, and so when I got my first general management role, when I was running businesses, I literally like said, okay, here's the three things we got to get done, this
Mhm.
week, this year, this month, this year. And because I thought it was really important that we boil all this stuff down into some things that make sense for the team. And
Right.
I think it's a really important thing. Don't underestimate how important it is to set the priorities for your team, because sometimes they don't
That's
know
right.
what's important because there's
That's
so
right.
many things that they want us to work
That's
on
right.
in your big company.
And it may be important for that team, and it's out of alignment where we're going as an organization. And so,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
constantly make sure that we're all working towards that end goal is important as well. And I'm going to turn on my light really quickly because the sun went down about 25 minutes earlier than I thought it was going to. Okay. There. Much better.
Oh, I can see you now. Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it was there's when in the absence of clear defined mission, then then everything's important. And it's like I often say, when the leader is absent, chaos reigns, right? So
That's right.
when the leader doesn't put the rudder in the water and says this is where the ship is going, the ship is just gonna drift. It's just gonna go
Yeah.
all over the place. And you see that when you walk into a business and you're like, you see chaos, right? When I see
That's
chaos, I
right.
see a leader that isn't leading, you
That's
know,
right.
and they're not setting the priorities and communicating the priorities and having those meetings and holding people accountable. And I
Hmm.
think that's like right now, if you asked every one of my employees, 100% of them will tell you exactly what our goals are this month. And if they don't, I'll be really angry because I talk about it several times a day, every day. So so I would be
Oh,
upset if they didn't know. But it's
yeah.
because I try to boil it down to like really simple. This is what we got to get
Yeah.
done.
That's
And
right.
that way so it's easy to remember, easy to repeat because we're busy and there's a lot of
Yeah.
priorities. And I think it's our job to boil it down to here's what I want you to do. And I
That's
think
right.
that's really important. And the other thing too is I think is that we do, like you mentioned, be open to listen to all the different ideas from the people, right? All the different
Hmm.
ideas, right? And then but then it's not effective to just listen to all the ideas. You have to make a decision, like
That's right.
this is the direction we're headed, and
That's right.
these are based on these reasons.
Yeah.
And I think that is really helpful, is the why behind
That's right.
what we've chosen for our priority.
Mm. Well, and you're exactly right. To close that communication gap, I did a teamwork and communication exercise with law enforcement in Kansas, and we had three different branches. We had the local police, we had the sheriff, and we had the Kansas Bureau of Investigations. And you know, when they would show up on a scene, all three branches, there was mass chaos because number one, they didn't have a common language.
Mm.
Number two, the people who were stepping forward were not the people who needed to be stepping forward, and vice versa. There were people who needed to step forward that were not. And so we did this whole exercise, and there's a communication exercise where they're not allowed to use words and they're passing papers back and forth. And there's one goal, and it's a very simple goal. And the reason they were not able to achieve the goal is because the initiator of the communication did not ask one question, and that was, what's the goal? If they would have passed that question back, it would have been solved in 30 seconds.
Yes, yeah, I love that. I love those workshops where they do something that just gets everyone thinking.
It's
Those are
so fun.
those are fun. Yeah, I love that.
So
Since I
fun.
left my corporate days, I don't get to those too often anymore, but I do love them when I went to them. So this has been fantastic, Wendy. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners right now?
I would just say that if you are in a position where you w- either are leading or you want to lead better, just be intentional. Just choose one thing.
Mhm.
As you said, I don't know if it was before we pressed record or if it was after we pressed record. There is not a lack of information, there's a lack of execution. And so there's more information out there than we know what to do with on leadership. And so I would just say be intentional, choose one thing and just do it. And get someone who is a mentor, someone who you trust, who is willing to point out your blind sites and just say, here's what I am working on, and I really want to get better on this. Mine, as I told you, was, the intensity. So, when you see that intensity rise in me, would you just let me know that you see that so that I can see it? Because I may not. And that's really changed my relationships, not just in business, in life. My son and I, who is 25, we now have conversations that he'll go, "Hey, mom, that was a little intense." And I'll go, "It sure was. Let me rephrase that." So, you know, just choose intention and choose one thing and just get better.
I love that. It's so important. I know I had Ken Blanchard on the show, and he said, "I write my books purposely small so that people will read it and do it,
Yeah.
and not just
Yeah.
think about it." So it's about
Yeah.
choose one thing and get it done. I love that. It's action over intentions. Action is so
That's right.
much more important than intentions.
That's
I
right.
love that. Such a great, powerful message. Wendy, how can our listeners find out more about you and in the services you offer?
So I am on LinkedIn. It's Wendi Swanson. And I do have a Facebook. It is the name of my company is Edelman Group, Etymon, Edelman meaning core, get to the root. So Edelman Group. And my email is also on my website, which is edmundgroup.com.
Fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for all of Wendy's resources. And again, leaders, if something in this conversation you sparked your interest, if you want to talk to Wendy, please reach out to her. That's why we put the links in the show notes. Reach out to her. Say you heard her on this show and you had some questions, or you want some clarifications, or you say, "Wow, I really want to learn. Have you come out to my company and help us get more intentional, become better, a little more human centric." She's the expert. She's going to help you along the path. So please reach out to her because she can offer those services that you may need in your company. So, Wendy, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your journey, the things that you're working on, because I think we've learned a lot, and it's going to help us along our leadership journey.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Thank you. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.